Not many people know that Henry VIII's last wife, Catherine Parr, was hiding a ruin a secret so shocking it almost led to her own execution. Terrified to share the same fate as the wives that came before her, Catherine saved herself with one brilliant trick. We'll get more into that later on. For a woman in Tudor England, Catherine Parr had a really unique life. With 4 husbands under her belt, she's considered the country's most married queen. In that sense, Henry VIII, who married 6 times, found his match when he met her. Catherine was raised as the eldest child of her formidable single mother, Maud Green. A woman of apparently great intellect, Maud was entrusted by the Queen to manage the court school. Just like her mother, Catherine was also extremely clever. She had a passion for languages and was fluent in French, Latin, and Italian. Upon becoming queen, she took time to learn Spanish as well, eventually writing the first book ever to be published by a woman in the English language. Seriously impressive. When Catherine was just a young girl, she made an eerie prediction about her future. The tale goes that, as a girl, she hated the tedium of needlework, and would tell her mother, "My hands are ordained to touch crowns and scepters, not spindles and needles." At the age of 17, Catherine made the first of her 4 marriages, but the union was doomed to a heartbreaking end. His name was Sir Edward Berg, and it should have been a fairy tale romance. He was age-appropriate, thankfully, from a wealthy family, and he was a knight. But sadly, he was also in very poor health, and he ended up passing away just 4 years after they were wed. At 21 years old, Catherine was a young and childless widow, left to start all over again. Just 1 year later, she married John Neville, 3rd Baron Latimer, in 1534. Like her first husband, this one was independently wealthy and twice her age, which better aligns with the young widow image that's come to be stuck with Catherine. But this marriage put her into grave danger. During the 1536 Northern uprisings, Catherine and her stepchildren by her second husband were taken as hostages. The rebels informed Lord Latimer that he had to come back home, or they would kill Catherine and his children. Latimer somehow managed to persuade the rebels to let them go. While their return was a miracle, their easy release made many people suspicious, including the king himself. Was Catherine's husband really a victim, or a co-conspirator with the Northerners? On their charges belated against Lord Latimer, the damage was done. His reputation suffered irreparable harm, and the family escaped the South to avoid the judgment of their peers. Soon after, Lord Latimer fell ill. He ended up passing away in 1543, and Catherine was once again a childless widow. But her situation was a little different now. At 31 years old, she was finally rich enough to marry on her own terms, and luckily, she had some great connections to get herself back into all the right social circles. You see, her mother had been a friend of Henry VIII's first wife, Catherine of Aragon. On top of that, when Catherine was younger, she had been best friends with Henry's eldest daughter, Mary Tudor. She was when Catherine entered Mary's social circles that she caught Henry VIII's eye. This must have made for a very awkward situation, though, considering that she was only 4 years older than Mary, and had even met Henry when she was just a child. But of course, that didn't stop the king from scoping her out, and he liked what he saw. After all, Catherine stood out in many ways. She had bright hazel eyes and a great height. According to some sources, she stood as tall as 5'10", which is very tall for a woman in Tudor England. Being very tall himself, maybe Henry liked the idea of finally seeing eye to eye with a companion. But the king wasn't the only man interested in her. The brother of Henry's third wife, Thomas Seymour, was also a serious contender for her heart. In fact, Catherine was deeply in love with him, and started having very serious discussions about marriage. This enraged Henry because he wanted Catherine for himself, and could not stand the idea of losing to another man. So when he asked her to become his sixth wife, Catherine was put in a terrifying position. Although Catherine felt Thomas Seymour was the love of her life, it was made clear to her that her reluctance to accept the king as her husband was to defy God's will. Seymour was, by all accounts, handsome, charming, and about Catherine's age. On the other hand, Henry didn't exactly have any of these qualities at that time, but his other attributes must have been very hard to pass up. For Catherine, the smart choice won out over the passionate one. But a letter where she ultimately rejects Seymour tells us what her real preferences were. She wrote, "My mind was fully bent to marry you before any man I knew. Howbeit God made that impossible, which seemed to me most impossible." Despite the fact that his minister was blackmailing her husband, Henry VIII had plans for Catherine Parr even before her second husband had passed away. He sent her gifts of pleats and sleeves, in addition to stylish Italian gowns. At this point in time, the king was quite old, but still very determined to get what he wanted. The two of them got married on July 12, 1542, just 4 months after her second husband died. Catherine became the first Queen of England, also to be titled Queen of Ireland. Henry had just adopted the title of Ireland's king. While Catherine Parr was Henry VIII's last wife, there was still another surviving wife lurking around. Catherine of Cleves, wife number 4. She was alive, well-favored, and still living in England, but she hated Catherine. While Anne had gotten along with wife number 5, Catherine Howard, who weirdly supplanted Anne, she actually didn't think very highly of wife number 6. Apparently, Anne didn't think that Catherine was pretty enough to replace her, and she made her feelings very well known, saying, "A fine bird a Madame Catherine has taken upon herself." But clearly, Catherine paid this insult little attention. Unlike Anne, she proved to be an adept nursemaid for Henry's body and spirits. Not only did she soothe and attend his leg ulcers herself, she also convinced him to finally ditch his vanity and embrace his reading glasses. No small feat for the wife of an unruly king. Catherine's official badge featured a long-haired maiden rising from a large Tudor rose. Her official queen's motto was, "To be useful in all I do." But, as queen, her Protestant sympathies were readily apparent. Not only did she secure the release of several Protestant prisoners, she also placed leading Protestant scholars in the household of her stepson, Prince Edward, thereby ensuring a future for the reformers. But these power plays would have some seriously dark consequences down the line. While Catherine and Henry's marriage was pretty solid, those in his court had gotten used to switching things up on the regular. What would the revolving cast of wives who had come before her? In 1546, there was a failed plot to replace her with a new queen, the king's own daughter-in-law, Mary Howard, who had recently been widowed. But there was other dark planning afoot. Mary's brother had different plans for her. He wanted her to marry Thomas Seymour, Catherine Parr's ex, and from there slide into the position of King Henry's mistress. Talk about messy! Luckily for Catherine, she was very well liked, especially by her own stepchildren. In fact, the future Elizabeth I of England was a stepchild who Catherine was the closest with, because they both shared a love of learning and language. At 11 years old, Elizabeth gifted her father and stepmother with a translation of Catherine's prayers, or meditation, in French, Italian, and Latin. Catherine would also take charge of Elizabeth's welfare after Henry's death. Catherine famously brought Henry's much-fraught royal family back together. The king's only surviving son, Prince Edward, took a shine to his later stepmother. When he was only 9 years old, he encouraged her in her efforts to improve her own Latin and also asked her to keep his Catholic sister Mary away from evil influences. It's generally believed that Catherine was a really big influence in both Edward and Elizabeth Tudor's Protestant learnings and leanings. Before Henry VIII passed away in 1547, he made many provisions for Catherine's past future. Among them was a decree that she should take custody of his youngest daughter, then 13-year-old Elizabeth Tudor. She also took another studious royal girl as her ward, the future 9 Days Queen, Lady Jane Grey. Unknowingly, Catherine mentored 2 queens of England. In 1547, Henry VIII was finally on his deathbed, and his last tribute to Catherine Parr was heartbreaking. Henry thanked God for finally delivering him so faithful a spouse. He showed his thanks by bequeathing Catherine a 7,000-year pension, which is millions of dollars a year in today's money, plus the right to keep all of the Queen's jewels and clothes. So clearly, he died feeling a sense of immense gratitude towards her. On January 28, 1547, Henry officially passed away, leaving Catherine as Queen Dowager. She was, of course, supposed to take care of his daughter Elizabeth, and presumably stay close to her beloved stepson, Edward, but instead, one scandalous decision tore the family apart forever. Catherine ended up having no role in the reign of her beloved stepson, partly because she scandalously married her true love, Thomas Seymour, less than 4 months after Henry's death. After all, the king was barely one to wait between his marriages, so why should she? At the age of 35, Catherine became pregnant for the first known time. She had never been able to get pregnant in any of her first 3 marriages, so this must have come as a welcome surprise. You would think she would be happy. After all, she was now finally having a baby with the love of her life. But by this point, her fairy tale union with Thomas had turned into a living nightmare of the worst kind. After moving in with Catherine, Thomas started showing his true colors. It turns out he was a major creep. It wasn't long before he became inappropriate with her young stepdaughter, Elizabeth Tudor. Apparently, Thomas would surprise the girl in bed at odd hours for horseplay, and even tried to kiss her. Initially, Catherine brushed off his attention as innocent. As if to demonstrate his lack of harm, she sometimes joined in on the romps and helped hold Elizabeth down as Thomas tickled her. Yikes. But at one point, this ended with her husband playfully cutting the girl's dress to bits, which was clearly more than a red flag. As Catherine advanced in her pregnancy, her husband's attention to Elizabeth became increasingly inappropriate, until the situation finally exploded. In May of 1548, the tension climaxed, with Catherine finding Thomas and Elizabeth in an embrace. What exactly happened is ambiguous, but it definitely ended up with Elizabeth being sent away from her favorite stepmother's home. She might have been sent away for her own protection, or to remove her as a third wheel in Catherine's longed-for domestic bliss, or to preserve everyone's reputation, or some combination of the 3. In any case, while they had once been incredibly close, Catherine and Elizabeth would never see each other again, which is very sad when you consider their kind of bond. Even after Catherine gave birth to her only child, Mary Seymour, in late August of 1548. But what should have been the happiest day of her life soon turned dire. She suffered from postnatal complications and ended up passing away just 8 days later at the age of 36. Despite being known as the one who survived, Catherine outlived Henry VIII by less than 2 years. Her ending is extra sad, considering how she narrowly avoided the executioner's sword. You see, Catherine knew about the fates of the wives who would come before her, and she knew that she was playing a dangerous game with Henry. In order to avoid his wrath, she had to hide a dark secret. She was a Protestant, pitting her directly against her husband. In 1546, Lord Chancellor Thomas Rea Thessaly and the Catholic faction at court plotted to out her as a heretic. This involved implicating her with Anna Skew, an evangelist who was herself under arrest for heresy, and to whom Catherine was rumored to be sympathetic. While being questioned for heresy, Anna Skew became the first woman on record to ever be a victim of persecution in the Tower of London. Many suspect that this was done so as Skew would give up Catherine and her close ladies in waiting as Protestant themselves. Either way, it didn't work, as Anaskew was burned without ever implicating the Queen. But that didn't spell the end of danger for Catherine. I mean, spousal disagreements should not end in arrest, but that's exactly what happened. In 1546, Henry's suspicions about Catherine's radical beliefs were inflamed by some religious argument between them. Apparently convinced of her heresy, Henry signed a warrant for the arrest of his sixth wife. As Catherine's arrest warrant was drawn up in 1546, rumors swelled that Henry's wandering eye had resurfaced. Most scandalously, the alleged other woman was Catherine Brandon, the widow of his late best friend, who was also Catherine's own good friend and lady-in-waiting. Nevertheless, the whispers came to nothing. It's generally agreed that by this point Henry's sexual apathy might have been too battered by life to cheat. So why didn't Henry VIII go down as the king who executed half his wives? Well, Catherine was very lucky. Somehow the warrant for her arrest managed to floor conveniently outside her door. Maybe it was planted by an ally. This meant that the Queen got a life-saving heads-up that her condemned predecessors like Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard did not. And with news of her impending arrest, Catherine came up with a plan. She was able to defend herself from Henry's rage with the ultimate weapons, complete self-deprecation and capitulation to his ego. The next time Henry talked religion with her, Catherine claimed she only argued with him in order to distract him from his festering leg wounds. She also yearned for his wisdom. After all, Catherine was, in her own words, but a woman with all the imperfections natural to the weakness of my sex. Despite her vigorous education and writing career, Catherine would never assume to know better about religion than her husband. And he bought it. After all, entering the dating scene again, especially at his current stage of health, could have been a bit much. Despite his forgiveness, Henry didn't have enough time or will to call off her arrest. The Lord Chancellor and guards came to follow through with the warrant against Catherine while she was in front of the king himself, and Henry angrily ordered them away, saving Catherine's life. After the king's passing, Catherine finally felt safe enough to come out as a full-blown Protestant. This is evident in her final 1547 book, Lamentations of a Sinner, where she makes an argument for the then radical doctrine of salvation based on faith alone. Such beliefs ran completely counter to the doctrine of the Catholic Church, and most fatally, her last husband, Henry VIII. But let's be honest, waiting until Henry's death to vocalize her full beliefs is completely understandable, considering what happened to the wives that came before her. Thanks for watching History Exposed. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring with us. Don't forget to visit our main page, Factornate, for more incredible facts about everything.